In recent years, Tim has founded the Institute of International Monetary Research at Buckingham University. He has founded what I think will be a great legacy for himself and the ideas that he has espoused. Tim has been a consistent opponent of our membership of the European Union, having voted against us joining in the original referendum in 1975. Tim has also been the economic correspondent for Standpoint magazine. He has a phenomenal output. Ladies and gentlemen, we are privileged here today to have one of the most clear-sighted and consistent advocates of our cause. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please welcome Tim Condon.
I'm giving a presentation this afternoon about Britain, Europe and the world in the 21st century, so I'm being quite ambitious, but I think I might just talk a little bit about what's happened in the last day or two with Joe Johnson's resignation. What he's talking about is a second referendum. Let's just imagine what that might mean. We are actually leaving the European Union at the end of March. So there's a second referendum presumably after that. Well, suppose that the referendum is to stay outside the European Union, then it's been a waste of time. Suppose it's to rejoin the European Union, which is plainly what Joe Johnson and others want. Now imagine what might happen. There's a Conservative government led by whom that has to renegotiate entry to the European Union. Perhaps there's been a general election. There's a Labour Party in power that has to negotiate entry to the European Union. Perhaps there's some Lib Dems, or there's a Lib Dem in coalition. Can you imagine the chaos? Well, I can also tell you, by the way, that I also be advocating a third referendum, and I'm sure many of us would. So can I just say on that I really don't think the second referendum is at all likely. Anyway, I'm going to talk this afternoon about this very large topic that you see just here in front of you. Can I at this point just say, Barry, thank you very much for your kind remarks about me, but can I make also some kind remarks about the Bruges Group? Because obviously for 30 years now you've been presenting quality arguments in the high-level debate on the European Union, and I think that we have given a much better account of ourselves in those debates than the other side has. They were surprised, I think, in the referendum. They didn't expect us, because they were the establishment and they were the university educated, they were very surprised to find that no, we could match the easy an argument, and we believed what we were saying. So it's very important for us to keep up producing quality, persuasive, interesting, and valid arguments. We don't need to make a fib here and there. There was no need to say £250 million a week. Let's say 250, you've been correct. Okay. So that's what I want to do this afternoon. We've been living, in a sense, for 3 centuries, I suppose, even in our lifetimes, in a Eurocentric world in which Britain is taken to be a European country. What I want to show in the next 20 minutes or so is that that isn't the sort of world that our grandchildren will live in. A very different world is evolving. And it is very much about identity as a nation. I was, in fact, despite the incident this morning, I was going to be talking about the European Army and that, because there's no doubt that the purpose of the European Union always has been, right from the 1950s, about the formation of the European superstate with a single army. This, in fact, Monnet put this to Churchill not in the early 1950s to stop another European war, and Churchill explained, no, that's not what we want in Britain. But that is what we're about. It's about keeping Britain as an independent, sovereign nation. Let's then think about why we joined in the first place. We joined in 1973 because we took our nation to be an economic failure from 1945 to 1973, and we took it that our neighbours were a great economic success story, and that we had to join them to catch up with the kind of growth that they were enjoying, and there's no doubt that that was the key argument. Let's just look at what's happened in the last 35 years. Yes, though, I suppose there's a sense in which there's still a Eurocentric world, even in 1980, although, of course, the United States has a larger economy than the European Union. There have been periods in the last 30 years when the EU has been larger than the United States. But today, what's happened? It should work. There we go, sorry. This shows you the share of the European Union as currently constituted, its share of world output going back to 1980. It used to account for 30% or so of world GDP. That has fallen up until 2010 to about 17%. We, of course, are leaving in a few months' time. So in 2020, that share will be down to 12.8%. So the EU share of world output will have dropped from getting on for a third to about an eighth. And that all in the last 35 years. What I want to do now is to think about the future. As I said, we've got to think, are we going to tie ourselves up, having the same army as our neighbours? Is this a reason, is this something that's going to be successful and worthwhile in the 21st century? Is it something big and powerful and important? Have we really got to get mixed up with these our neighbours? And I don't want to be too unfriendly towards them, but okay. Now I'm going to argue that when I've just become a grandfather about 6 months ago, when my grandson is my age, I'm going to argue that the European Union will account for about 5% of world output. Right? Two reasons. One is to do with the number of people who actually are working in the European Union relative to the rest of the world, and the other is the amount that each person produces. Obviously, the amount of output that a nation makes depends on the number of people, the number of output per person. Now this shows you the share of the world total of working age people that are in the European Union. This is people between the ages of 20 and 70. It used to be the ages of 15 and 65, but anyway. And you can see 6.5% or so, including us, in 2015, 3.5% in 2075. Actually, my grandson will be slightly younger than I now, but okay. So that, when my grandson is my age, more or less, there will be, the EU will be home of only 1 in 30 of the world's working population. Now you might say that this all depends on assumptions and so on. Yes, it does, but demographics is relatively predictable. Obviously, we know how many people there are of a certain age, women there are of an age who have children, all that kind of stuff. And by the way, this assumption assumes that in the EU there is a return to the replacement level of, forgive me, I'm being a bit technical, fertility, but so that women have 2 children or 2.1 children rather than at present they typically have less than 1.5. So let's think about that. But then let's also think about this question of how much they produce. Now, when I was growing up, incomes per head in Britain and in Europe were much higher than in the rest of the world, meaning on average, say, India, China, and Africa were desperately poor compared with Britain, America, Europe, and so on. But in the last 25 years, the growth of output per head in the European Union has typically been about 0.5% to 1% a year. I suggest that the thousands and thousands of pages of the Acquis Communautaire has got quite a lot to do with that. That has been one of the things, too much regulation, too much government, one of the reasons why the EU has failed to enjoy the productivity growth. Yes, of course, we're richer than India and China, so it's easy for them to copy us and catch up. No. European Union productivity growth has been lower than other advanced countries, including the United States, Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, and so on. Let us assume that from here on, the gap in the growth of output per head is a bit less than it has been, and it's about 1% a year. Then this shows you the share of the European Union world output through from 1980, 1992 on actually to about 2075. And it's down to 7.5% actually in that chart. But actually some of those assumptions are rather favorable to the EU. Well, I explained the point about the demographic assumption that the United Nations made in those projections. All the demographic projections, by the way, aren't me, they're the UN. They're not sort of made up out of thin air. So, we take it that we, I think one of the key things in the way these remains thing is that, it's Europe, we're quite small. It's a dangerous world out there. We must get them on side. We've got to be linked with them. That's the way these civil servants think. That's the way these infants and children think. That is the reality of the world is going to be in the next 50, 60, 70 years. Now, they might say this is a typical Brexiteer propaganda kind of stuff. Look, the demographic projections on Brexit space, as I said, are from the UN. The other assumption I made is just mechanical. All right? And so, in my view, we are quite wrong to think that in the 21st century the EU is going to be a very important part of the world economy. Its importance is going to collapse.
Louder.
And looking ahead, we have got to think about the kind of world we're going to be living in. And there's no doubt that obviously China and India are going to be more important, but also America, Australia, Canada will probably remain roughly as important as they are today. And to me, that's where we should be looking in the 21st century for our natural friends and supporters in the world economy and in world diplomacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Tim. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now my great pleasure to welcome David Campbell-Bannerman, the Conservative MEP for the East of England. I believe David likes to be known as DCB, the MEP.
Shorter.
David has served in the European Parliament since 2009, both as a UKIP member and then as a Conservative. Whatever David's affiliation has been, he rightly has a reputation for being one of the most assiduous members. His output of research is phenomenal. This week, many of you will have seen his proposal in the Daily Telegraph, entitled, "Here's how we can bin the backstop and finally have a big Brexit breakthrough." In this article, he draws on his experience as a special advisor to the Northern Ireland Secretary of State, Patrick Mayhew, at the start of the peace process in 1996. In its heyday, David also served as chairman of the Bow Group. Having been born in India, David is a great supporter of the Commonwealth. He played David played a prominent part in the Brexit campaign and its prolonged aftermath, regarding the EU as a remote, anti-democratic and fraudulent institution, which is destructive of our historic British identity. Ladies and gentlemen, Could you please welcome David Campbell Bannerman, MEP.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Barry, thank you so much for a very kind introduction. I think the timing is wonderful. I mean, are we not talking about whether we're going to achieve real independence from the EU or not, particularly with regard to the backstop? And these are worrying times in many ways. I would congratulate you on your 30 years anniversary of the Bruges speech. Which obviously was a very key speech. I recall Mrs. Thatcher saying that it was like inviting Genghis Khan to speak of the virtues of peaceful coexistence. I have to say it feels like that every day in European Parliament when I speak. What has changed? I mean, she went on to say that winning an active cooperation between independent sovereign states is the best way to build the economic community. To try to suppress nationalism and concentrate power at the centre of a European conglomerate would be highly damaging. And of course, the key words, we have not successfully rolled back the frontiers of the state in Britain, only to see them reimposed by a European superstate exercising a new dominance from Brussels. And, you know, she was right then, and she's right all the way through. But ladies and gentlemen, I've been invited along today to talk not about Super Canada, which you're probably aware of, is the proposed trade deal I put forward. I've used 9 years of experience in European Parliament. I knew it would come down to this, to a trade deal at the end of the day. And I'm suggesting Super Canada, which is bigger, wider and deeper than the Canadian deal, which I worked on firsthand. I met Justin Trudeau, not in Indian costume, but in the European Parliament, having signed that deal. And it's a good basis, a good template, in my view, for doing a UK-EU trade deal. And that's not just my view, many over there in the European Parliament. Of course, we have to get it through the European Parliament, past MEPs. You know, that is their view as well, because they know Canada, they understand how that worked, that deal. And it's a good starting point. And if we're talking about time, if we've only got 18 months, I think that is an important factor. But ladies and gentlemen, I didn't want to dwell on Super Canada today. I'm happy to take questions. But clearly, the real challenge now is the backstop. And the whole issue of Northern Ireland has been used, I think very wrongly, to try and undermine the case for a free trade agreement. I mean, I have to ask, you know, what has gone wrong? Because back in March this year, we had an offer from the EU, which is really what we wanted. It was Super Canada, CETA+++, was what President Tusk actually offered us. Why did he do that? Well, he followed our red lines back then in March. If you remember, he actually met the Prime Minister in number 10 on the 6th of March. And then he quoted back our red lines on the 7th of March, the next day, offering us Super Canada. You know, CETA+++, as David Davis puts it. And somehow it all went wrong from there. We had a deal back in March. This deal, by the way, has been offered to us not once, but 3 times. It was offered us, let me just quote, back on, I mean, this is just in October, but you actually had President Tusk saying, this is the deal that we've been offering all along. He calls it Canada+++. But that's what he said just last month. All along, we've had this deal on the table. And I have to say, I've gone around a lot of Conservative associations and Eurosceptic groups, and they didn't know about it because the government hadn't announced it. And we had a deal back in March, and somehow we then went into this strange beast of parallel government, where, you know, the Brexit, the Parliament was doing one thing, and number 10 and others were doing another thing, and we ended up with a checkers deal that no one likes. No one likes. I mean, President Juncker of the EU, actually said in the European Parliament when he made his big speech, you cannot have part of the single market. And Mr. Juncker said to me, did you see what he said? Did you see what he said? I said, yes, I agree with you. You can't have checkers. And Juncker, you know, Barnier doesn't like it, and nor does Jacob Rees-Mogg. They got on rather famously when they met up. But you know, we're on the same page here. Well, it doesn't work. And may I just say on checkers, two things which are big problems. The customs facilitation agreement, which is basically hiring Britain as an agent to collect duties for the EU, it hasn't had a good start because they're about to sue us for £3 billion for not collecting duties on Chinese goods. And that is a very real legal case, £3 billion, where they allege that we've not adequately accounted for duties on Chinese goods. That's not a great basis for actually hiring us as sort of permanent agents in a checkers deal. And the other thing is, and I think it's a very valid point, they don't want us messing with their single market, the four freedoms. You know, having one freedom, that's goods, but not the services and not the free movement and not the capital. And they just don't want us in their customs union and single market. And I've heard this right from the top, you know, for some of their key negotiators. So checkers doesn't work on that basis. And it is true to say, like with a mobile phone or an aeroplane, the service component is very integrated to the goods. So you sell an aeroplane, then you have a 30-year maintenance contract, which is very valuable. And if that is under different rules, that is not acceptable to the EU. And they say mobile phones are much the same, 40% is the actual, you know, product. But a lot of it's a service contract. So I don't think checkers is workable on that basis. But I take probably more encouragement from some of the snippets we're hearing from Sunday Times, The Times and elsewhere. I don't think we're there yet, and I'll come back to the backstop in a minute, but the idea, there seems to be a pivoting towards a Canada-style deal and away from checkers. I think that's just practicality, and I think in order to sell it, they'll have to do that because politically it's slightly embarrassing. But I think there'll be such relief if we did get a deal close to Canada, such relief and outpouring of joy around the world, and especially in Britain, that I think, you know, any embarrassment would be lost in the tumults and the praise. So I think that's a false worry, but that is what's been reported. So, you know, they mentioned a deal on financial services, on data. These are sound like free trade agreements to me. But all the way through this, the excuse they've given for not doing a Canada deal, and right from the top for number 10 and others, is, oh, the Northern Ireland border. And as Barry rightly said, I was involved. I was standing behind John Major and John Bruton, the Irish Prime Minister, when the peace talks started. And there was a terrorist murder right in the frame of John Bruton's eye line, who'd actually killed a number of people. And this is the nature of the talk. So I'm very aware of the sensitivities about the border. And we don't want a hard border. But who is calling for a hard border? There's no one. No party, no individual. Have you ever heard someone say we must have a hard border? And even the EU has now said, and Barracker has said, and the Irish have been told there's no need for a hard border. And we said all the way along, we are not going to impose a hard border. And I fear that this is just being used as an excuse to keep us trapped in the customs union and single market. It's an excuse. And now they're talking about things that I've done 4 papers now on the Northern Ireland border. I helped the RG one, which is the best one by far, by Owen Patterson and others. A lot of support for that. Please do read it. But you know, the point is, you know, they don't want a solution. That's the problem. They don't want a solution. And I tell you what's driving it. It's business, and it's mainly UK business. The big five, as they call themselves, the CBI and the IOD and the EEF and the FSB and the British Chamber of Commerce, they've got together, and they like checkers because it's all about frictionless trade to them. Everyone else hates it, but no, they like it. And I think what they've done is absolutely appalling. And what I was going to say is that we need a public inquiry after all of this to see who is talking to whom and who is involved in undermining our democracy and the referendum vote. And these people must be brought to account. And don't care how senior they must be brought to account. But ladies and gentlemen, we now have, so we've had all this nonsense about checks on the border. And remember, the Irish Revenue says that you only need to check 200 trucks a day. They don't even think it's worth having these checking points away from the border. It's not worth it. And 4 times as many exports go from Northern Ireland to the rest of GB, no wonder DUP is worried, than to the south, to the Republic of Ireland. So this has been grossly exaggerated. But now we've got the backstop issue, which I think is another attempt to trap us in the customs union and to keep us uncompetitive. They really fear, it's beginning to come out now, you've seen public statements, we don't want you to be so competitive. Well, I'm sorry, this lady knew about that, this is what we stand for, isn't it? We want to be competitive, we want the free market to be liberated. And we will show the way in Europe, if necessary, but we're not going to be handcuffed, as the DUP put it, to the customs union and the single market. But ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to talk to you. I've done a paper as a think piece, which hopefully may get a breakthrough on the actual negotiations. I won't say who I sent it to or what's going on, but I wanted to explain it to you. It's a bit legalistic to some extent, but then that's what these things are like. But essentially, what it is we replace the backstop. And what is the backstop? Is these paras 49 and 50 from the joint report, the deal that was done in December, and replace it with a legal protocol which is subject not to the ECJ or any of that, it's subject to the International Court of Justice in The Hague. And if you actually put a protocol into the United Nations, then it is actually regarded as an international treaty in its own right. Now that's important, that we're not subject obviously to the ECJ, we don't want that, but I think it does make a difference. If we can scrap this backstop and reword it in the right way, I think that could lead to a breakthrough in terms of our negotiations. So what I'm calling for is that, if I might just run through some of the proposal here, is that I would say that that the notion for this there is a good example, which is, remember the Lisbon Treaty. Ireland had some worries. They voted down the first referendum. The EU, of course, came along and said, you got the wrong result, do it again, as they often do. But I have to say there was a protocol there on 3 items of very important Irish sovereignty. One was neutrality, army neutrality. Another one was tax sovereignty, and the third one was about abortion rights and social rights. And they put that in the protocol to the Lisbon Treaty. And the point about that, not that I agree with that or not, it's not about agreeing with the Lisbon Treaty, but you could actually say to you, well, here's a precedent. You've done this for Irish sovereignty, for the Lisbon Treaty, why not do it for us as part of these negotiations? But it'd be far better, from our point of view, the wording and the reassurances would be much better. This is what I think it should contain. First of all, we've got to reassure people about sovereignty. We really believe in sovereignty, not just ours, but the Irish sovereignty as well. And that should be there, that nothing in this agreement, this withdrawal agreement, should compromise our sovereignty, our constituent rights, territorial status, constitutional integrity. That's number one. Number two, let's get it straight. This free trade agreement, this is another excuse being used, the Canada-style deal, they said it only applies to GB. That isn't true. If you ask the EU, they say, no, it's UK-wide. But of course, this backstop comes in if there is no deal or it's not done in time. So it isn't actually right to say that. But let's put it in writing that it applies to all of the UK. We don't leave out Northern Ireland. The third one then is if you do have a gap between the deal, and this is what's driven this backstop thing, if there's a gap between negotiating the deal, then they're worried, the Irish government is worried about whether there's a hard border there as a result. So you just say it's not going to happen, you say that you're going to continue with North-South cooperation, All-Ireland economy, protect the Good Friday Agreement. This is all in that backstop language, and it's not that bit, it's not controversial. Then you spell out, and this is probably the most important bit, if we're arguing about this hard border as being the real problem, it's brought down the talks of frozen the talks, then let's spell out all the things we're going to do to avoid a hard border. Because if you do that in a protocol which is legally binding on you through the International Court of Justice, then that should give the reassurance the Irish need and others need. So it's on things like SPS, a sanitary, phytosanitary checks, common biosecurity zone. All of that could go in this area. You need a veterinary agreement, so you don't have to do so many checks. It's 40%, it's about 10% now. They already do these checks. It goes up to about 40% because of the change, but not 100%. Customs declarations, country of origin certificates, product compliance checks, those are called market checks by the EU. They could all be built into this protocol. Trusted trader, authorised economic operators, and VAT and all the sort of other things in there. Single electricity market and the railways, working together. Now, you put all this together, these are the border issues, the hard border issues that underline all these problems. But if you set it out in this way, then you do give real reassurance. I think we need, and this is the key part for Brexiteers, is that no part of the UK shall remain subject to the rules of the internal market, and no part shall remain in the EU customs union. Let's spell it out legally in this protocol that if we're going to do this on hard border, we don't expect to be trapped in the customs union single market. And let's put it in that. Now, regulatory convergence or divergence, that can be done in a free trade agreement. I was in Peru on a trade deal. They have this regulatory council or committee, and they discuss regulations. If they have new regulations, or the EU comes out with yet more red tape, as we know, they discuss it, and you manage the free trade agreement. This is done with every EU free trade agreement. So why not us? And if we do it, then those voices of business can actually find something useful to do, the CBI and ID. They can actually, get involved in this. I have no objection to that. If they want to keep the chemicals industry much closer to the EU or the car industry, that's the place for it in a free trade agreement. And then finally, you put in the echoes of the Good Friday Agreement, as I said, I was involved in, is you create a new North-South institution which dedicates itself to avoiding a hard border. And it looks at institutional ways of doing that. And I think, and modern technology, it can be done with existing technology, but it can look at sort of more advanced technology over time. And so just to conclude, Mr. Chairman, I believe if we offer this protocol, and as I say, it's gone to a number of people, I've written about it in the Telegraph, so please have a look and contact me if you have any queries. But the first point is it assures the Republic of Ireland and Irish citizens in very precise and detailed terms there will not be a hard border, even if the negotiations go on too long or there's no deal. Secondly, it reassures the EU and the WTO that there'll be proper managed access to the single market and customs union. And it does fit in with what Mr. Barnier has called an improved offer, and de-dramatising the situation, which is what he wants to do. The third point is the UK government can be reassured an FTA will be delivered, a free trade agreement can be delivered without breaking up the UK, without affecting constitutional integrity of the UK. And it will go through the UK Parliament. I believe that we can get a Canada Free Trade Agreement, I'm sure you heard that from Mark Francois, through Westminster. We will have the support, don't believe those that say otherwise. I think when it comes down to it, if the EU agrees this and wants it, which is what they do want, then we can get it through Westminster. And finally, Eurosceptics like us, European Research Group, the Unionist community in Northern Ireland, the Democratic Unionists, can be reassured the UK's constitutional integrity is not undermined. We won't stay in the customs union single market, and the backstop has been evolved into an acceptable form. So I present this to you as a possible solution to the current impasse, one that hopefully will unlock other recommendations like Super Canada, and we can get on with that. And I do believe in solutions, I do believe in friendly cooperation with the EU, but moving forward swiftly. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, David. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now my pleasure to introduce one of Ireland's most clear-headed thinkers and consistent campaigners, Tony Coughlin. In addition to his academic career at Trinity College Dublin, Tony has championed the interests of Irish sovereignty and democracy. Tony was the Joint Secretary of the Common Market Defence Campaign. He campaigned against Ireland joining the Common Market and against every treaty transferring greater powers to the European Union. Tony is Secretary of the National Platform for EU Research and Information. He has consistently held that the most important political task for all Democrats is to join in international campaigns in defence of the nation state. He has had a prominent role in decisive legal actions at the highest courts in defence of Irish constitutional rights, and he has articulated the case for a Europe of independent and cooperating nation states. Today, Tony is in the vanguard of the Brexit debate and the case for Ireland also leaving the European Union. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please give a warm welcome to a great campaigner, Tony Coughlin.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I spent all my adult life opposing the European project on democratic and internationalist grounds. As an internationalist, one stands for the right to independence and self-determination of nations, of course. And in fact, I took part in the first United Kingdom referendum, which was, of course, the one held by Harold Wilson way back in 1975. I remember speaking on the same platform with the late Tony Benn and Peter Shore on the Labour side, and Sir Richard Boddy, who unfortunately died last year, on the Conservative side on that occasion. And I think I've done nothing else in my life. I claim to have added one word to the English language, namely Irexit. After the United Kingdom referendum in 2016, myself and a number of fellow economists and some lawyers got together to produce a modest study paper why Brexit should be accompanied by Irexit, Ireland exit. Ireland is very different, the Republic of Ireland is very different from the United Kingdom in relation to the EU in terms of public attitudes. All the political parties in the Irish Parliament, the Irish Dáil, are very Europhile. The media is overwhelmingly Europhile. The Brexit process in Britain has been painted in the bleakest fashion as a disaster, a catastrophe for Britain, for apocalypse is going to come if it goes through. That's the attitude of the Irish political establishment. And they're anxious to do everything possible to abort it, to stop it. In fact, there was consternation at the United Kingdom referendum result among the establishment in Ireland, the pro-EU forces. Some of you have heard of the late Peter Sutherland. Peter Sutherland was a very big noise internationally, head of GATT, became the World Trade Organization, former EU commissioner, leading light in Goldman Sachs, etc. He died last year, but on the day after, 2 days after the British referendum, he wrote in the Irish Times, somehow this result needs to be overturned. And he was a key man in the Irish political establishment. And the Irish political establishment, by which I mean the Irish government, supported by all the political parties in the Dáil, including the erstwhile Republicans, the Sinn Féiners have recently changed their policy on this, they all are doing their best to abort the referendum process. And they're cooperating with the Commission, Barnier and Company, with the Remainers in this country, and with the Irish government, to try and prevent it in some way. And they still hope that they can hardly believe it's happening. And they hope it can be prevented, and they're playing into the hand of Mrs. May and they're cooperating. hope that in some way it can be either the softest possible Brexit or Brexit in name only. And they believe that can be brought about. And Chequers, of course, is substantially that. And they have a long way to succeeding, some might say. Depending on how the evolution of British politics goes, you may get another election, you may get Mrs. May might lose her job, but who will replace her and get a better deal? Or there may be another referendum. These are the hopes of the Irish political establishment. And yet, of course, the Irish public opinion is not necessarily identical with that of the establishment. On 2 occasions, as you know, when it came to referendum votes on new EU treaties, with all EU treaties have to be put to popular referendum in Ireland, because they changed our written constitution, which was adopted by referendum. And on the Treaty of Nice in 2001 and the Treaty of Lisbon in 2008, the people voted no, even though virtually all the political parties were urging a yes vote. We voted no to Lisbon in 2008, which was the EU constitution, which gave us all EU citizenship. I don't know to what extent people here realise that you have all now 2 real citizenships. You can only be a citizen of a state. You're citizen of the British state, the United Kingdom state, and you're also citizen of the European Union. Like in all classical federal constitutions, such as the United States of America, the Federal Republic of Germany, everyone has 2 citizenships, of the federal level and the local level. So you're all real EU citizens. Very important. And if there is any conflict between the rights and duties of EU citizenship and the rights and duties of national citizenship, the former has primacy under the treaty. Because you adopted the EU constitution, which is the Treaty of Lisbon. The Irish people voted no to that. Well, it turned out that more than half the voters. But of course they rerun the referendum. Our political class said we must rerun it. And they expect that to be done here in Britain too. The British government, at least on both sides, Labour and Conservatives, said we will respect the result. Though of course, what's happening, it does look from an outside as if Mrs. May has handed over the whole process to Sir Humphrey Appleby. Otherwise known as Mr. Oliver Roberts. And the thousands of civil servants who overwhelmingly voted Remain. They seem to be running the show. That, of course, comes back to this particular sequencing of the whole business which Mrs. May and the British government agreed to early on in the process. The Irish backstop is essentially a device to try and frustrate the whole business. The current backstop solution, under which the United Kingdom of Britain and the North of Ireland can remain temporarily in the customs union after leaving the EU, has become now the biggest obstacle to the Brexit negotiations. As you know, the reason is that the inner Irish border, the north-south Irish border, is the only mainland border between the EU and the UK. The puffing up of this backstop into an almost insurmountable obstacle is a fake, a deception, a confusion. The truth is that trade between Northern Ireland and the Republic, north-south trade in Ireland, amounts to a very small volume of agriculture, primarily agricultural produce. It's almost overwhelmingly, northern milk goes down from the south for processing, goes back for sale in the north and so on. Primarily agricultural products, without queues, and would be technologically easy to handle without local custom officials, if there was a will. But why? If the negotiations had been sensibly carried out, the first step towards a mutually acceptable solution would be to have agreed concrete trade agreements and regulations. The precise handling of this, namely the backstop, would be a logical second step. But why is the cart being put before the horse? The most obvious reason is the EU's panic at the imminent departure of a strong member state from the EU and its efforts to deter other states following Britain out. Because if the United Kingdom leaves the EU, and if Brexit does mean Brexit, and that means leaving the single market and the customs union. The Treaty of Rome was the customs union, and then the single market was added on by other treaties. If the United Kingdom really leaves the EU and leaves the single market and customs union, I have little doubt that the Republic of Ireland will follow it not too long afterwards. And Brussels knows that. And that has a huge influence on the tactics of Barnier and company in their desire to play along with the Dublin government and the Europhile establishment in Dublin, and to try and make sure that Brexit is not Brexit, that it's Brexit in name only, and to try, if possible, to ensure the United Kingdom stays as close as possible to the European Union as possible. That's a key element in their tactics and a reason for why they adopt the current position that they're adopting. So the so-called Irish backstop is a pseudo-problem that has been used by the Brussels Commission, the Irish government and Britain's own Remainers interacting with Ireland's ultra-Europhiles to do everything possible to frustrate the referendum decision of UK voters. Mr. Campbell Bannerman's idea of a protocol to the withdrawal treaty seems to be eminently sensible and has been advocated by others if there was a shift of gear in the British government in the coming period. The Anglo-Irish Common Labour Market and Travel Area has been in existence since the Irish state was established in 1922. It's a gratuitous arrangement between the Irish and British governments going back to that time. Common travel, practically allow Irish people to vote here. It has hugely facilitated Irish emigration to Britain over decades, and it's acted as a social safety valve for the failure of successive Irish governments to provide jobs at home for their own people. If a future Irish government, or the present government if it changes its attitude, were to decide that it was in the best interests of Britain and the UK that the Republic should leave the EU also, it's in a good position to use the continuance of the common labour market and travel area as a useful bargaining chip. I think Democrats in Ireland and all over Europe, certainly all over the EU, hope fervently that the United Kingdom will really leave the EU on the 29th of March next. Whether it's a result of Chequers or Chequers Plus, or some modification of it, or some shift towards Canada Plus, in a sense, that's hugely important, of course. But it's very important that Britain leaves. The only way we could stay in, of course, is to apply to extend the date, and that would require the agreement of the other EU countries. They'll probably give it in those circumstances. Would it require an act of Parliament as well? Possibly. But it's very important that it leaves. After that, there's no more British MEPs. There's no more British commissioner in Brussels. There's no more British judge on the ECJ. And all laws thereafter will be made at Westminster, even though many of them will be transposing EU laws still. But from then on, it seems to me that over the coming decade, the momentum of British policy will inevitably be towards separating ever more and more from the EU and assuming the role of an independent global Britain, which is the proper, noble situation that this country should adopt. It took the United Kingdom 13 years to get into the EU. It originally applied in 61 and didn't get into 73. So it would, in a sense, be a bit unrealistic, perhaps, or naive to think it could get out in 2 or even 3. Or get fully disentangle 40 years of common legislation. So it seems to me that Britain's Brexiteers, of whom this group here is a key element, need to prepare themselves for some years of further political battles for democracy ahead, in which Ireland's Irexiteers, we hope, will be glad to stand beside you. Daniel Hannan, who was very critical of Chequers, he said, well, if it does go through, Daniel Hannan, MEP, one could regard as a kind of stepping stone, analogous to the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921, which was gradually modified over several decades to lead to the establishment of full Irish independence with the establishment of an Irish Republic in 1948. Maybe it would be like that. One final point, which was alluded to by a gentleman from the floor this morning, about defence. One premise of classical Irish foreign policy was that the Irish state would never allow itself to become a security threat to Britain. But by seeking to stay in an increasingly militarised EU, Macron, as you know, was talking about a European army last week. An EU inevitably dominated by Germany, with France hanging on to Germany's coattails. Dublin is potentially aligning itself with possible future continental enemies of Britain. That's an important point to consider in looking at Dublin's current attitude. But Dublin hopes that the thing can be aborted, remember, and it's working with Garnier to ensure that. And Chequers certainly plays into their hands. On the other hand, Germany, of course, has its own outlook. Maybe Germany will come to realise that the Republic of Ireland is part of the Anglophone, the Anglosphere. We talk English. We have very close relations with the UK. Half of the Irish agricultural produce goes to this it goes to the UK, etc., etc. The most important single market for Irish industry is the United States of America. The second most important market is the United Kingdom. The US and UK together are broadly the same as the continental EU as external markets. Nearly 3/4 of Irish goods to the continent go through Britain. You know, they go from Dublin to Holyhead or Fishguard and so on, then to the continent through British ports. So these are big issues. But perhaps Germany may come to realise in the years ahead that Dublin is linguistically, culturally and economically closer to Boston than Berlin, that Ireland is part of the Anglosphere rather than continental Europe, and that were both the United Kingdom and Ireland outside the EU, the two islands, two states, Berlin might be in a better position to dominate the EU, or the continental EU, or to establish the Germanised Europe, which is what EU integration is all about for German policymakers.
Yeah, sure.
In that context, possibly London might support Germany getting a permanent seat on the UN Security Council as part of a political bargaining process over such matters. That's down the road. I am confident, as I said at the outset, that if Brexit really is Brexit, that if the United Kingdom leaves the single market, the customs union, and the control of the European Court of Justice, that the Republic of Ireland will follow not too long afterwards, because public opinion will not, in the Republic of Ireland, will not tolerate, will not want a border, north-south border, so-called hard borders, customs posts and all the rest. But the only way of avoiding that is for the Republic to leave the EU too, really. And that is really what the continentals are afraid of, what the EU Commission is afraid of. And that's a key element in the current debate over this whole matter. Thank you very much.
Dr. Anna Bailey from the Campaign for an Independent Britain and Briefings for Brexit. It's a question about the backstop. I mean, I think all our speakers today have agreed to a man that the backstop is a fake issue, that it's being used as a weapon and a wedge.
Yes.
Yeah. My question to the panel is, where do you think the main impetus for this tactic came from? Because I've heard various accounts. I've heard that the main driver was the Irish government, I've heard that it was the EU, and I've heard that it was number 10 to try and keep us into as close regulatory alignment as possible. And now that Theresa May has effectively agreed to the principle of it, is there any way we can get out of it now?
I think certainly the Irish government and Barnier and the EU Commission have been pushing it. The idea originally came from the EU Commission. It was in a report in November 2017. That was the first mention of the Irish backstop. And I think the civil service here have taken on board as an ideal way of trying to keep this state, the United Kingdom, Britain, in single market on the customs union. Supposedly the only way to avoid a hard border now, and yet the north-south trade is very modest, primary agricultural goods, and those who really look into this issue say that it's being pushed, boosted beyond any intrinsic merits it might have. It doesn't have any intrinsic merits. It's been used as an excuse, a feint, and Mrs. May is now committed to it. Maybe she'd make these Japanese car manufacturers, maybe they had a big influence on the whole business. Certainly civil services have. And the Irish establishment is quite, seemingly at the moment, very happy with this, that it can be used to give a Brexit in name only, at best, if it can get a Brexit at all.
David, have you got anything to add from your perspective?
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if it's working or not, I think the battery's low, but the first thing that was said at Chequers, if you remember, by the Prime Minister, is we can't allow our country to be broken up. And the whole thrust of it was, there was no solution to the Northern Ireland border issue. And I know that's come from number 10 and others. But it's very convenient, isn't it? As I said, I worked on 4 different papers. I felt the RG one, which is very substantive to Secretary of State Northern Ireland being involved, Lord Trimble, Sammy Wilson of the DUP, and David Davis all back this paper. And you can't just ignore it because they have a lot of expertise, but they don't want a solution. Because if you give them a solution, then we can't, they want us trapped in the customs union and single market as much as possible. So if you give them a solution on that, then you have a free trade agreement and you are free. And I think, as the professor said, if we actually get a proper Brexit now, I've had Remainer friends who are very senior and campaigning saying, I give up after that. If you get out now, we will never get back in. And that's what worries them. If you put them in the EA, or if you keep us close, they can get us back in. And that's why it's so vital to fight on this and win the battle.
Yes, I'll take a question from the gentleman by the window. You putting your hand up, sir?
How can we get the message out there to make a difference?
Yeah.
Don't let's all speak together and all agree and all clap. That's wonderful. But about making things happen. How's it going to do that? How are we going to do it?
Thank you very much. David, you're closest to the panel.
Yes, I mean, the gentleman there, I'll be there tomorrow as well at the armistice, 100 years since the Great War. And thank you for your service. Military service is very important. I feel there is a lot of anger building up. This is about democracy. It's not left or right. It's about democracy. I have to say, one lesson I learned in Northern Ireland, I don't like to think about it too much, is when I was special advisor there to Paddy Mayhew, I thought, well, how did this happen in Northern Ireland? I tell you why it happened, because democracy failed in Northern Ireland. The ability of democracy to handle the sectarian divisions and the political issues failed. And violence was ushered in. I do not want to see that in GB or in the UK because of democracy failing. This is very, very dangerous. And some of these people, some of my colleagues, MEPs, who are actually representing the EU to us, like Nick Clegg did, they are actually actively undermining our negotiations. And I think their behaviour is absolutely disgraceful. I got into trouble when I call them traitors. But what do you call it? When their loyalty, where is their loyalty? It's not to this country, it's to the EU country to be. And we have to, that is absolutely disgraceful. And I'm delighted, by the way, if Ireland exits, it's up to the Irish people who would like to interfere. But, there's a credible case for Ireland leaving. I would mention that the EU wants corporation tax of 33%. And we actually voted on a common consolidated tax base in the European Parliament a few months ago. The intention is, and Macron wants it at 33 because that's French rate, the intention is that you have a common corporation tax around the EU, and guess what? It doesn't go to Ireland or Dublin, it comes to Brussels. And then you're away, aren't you?
Well, obviously the answer in a way, can you read it right, is votes. And what we can all do when it's wrong is make sure that if we don't like what politicians do, we vote them out. Can I just say in this context that I realise that obviously you only get this occasion every now and again, we're something every now and again, well, there we are, that's democracy. It's not a perfect system of government, but better than anything else. But something else also bothers, or should bother, people like Theresa May. I hope it bothers them, and that is how they are thought about in the history books. I myself, I had a conversation with Mark about this just at the break. I said, she's mad. And what she is untenable and just. She's bad. But then, normally what people do in this situation is they sort of look around them and they make a judgment and they want to be thought of well in the future. And they want the history books to speak well of them. And maybe they do care about history. And I just say that people who laugh at history and, was fool who said that history is run. Look at the history of Ireland. My word, history matters. And so, I think we have to let the elite know that what they are doing is just plain wrong. It's just morally, it's just so wrong. It appears to be the case, and this is what's so terrifying, is
that it was quite possible that Theresa May became Prime Minister on a totally fraudulent prospectus, knowing at the time that she was going to sabotage certainly that doesn't be a viable interpretation of what's going on.
If I was also as a visitor, one thing that everyone here can do is to get in touch with your member of parliament. Answer them some of the points made here today and say you want Brexit to be delivered on. Good point.
I think this is one of the reasons that we can't fully grasp why people are just so intransigent. That I've met this so many times in discussing with Conservative politicians and others European issues. They have this closed mind and closed concepts, and they will not allow the light to come into their minds.
When Mrs May went for her second election and brought in 10 nice members of the DUP. I don't trust Tory MPs as far as I can throw them. And the idea of having some Irish common sense coming into the arguing the long time. And I would like to ask the members of the panel, because the DUP hasn't been mentioned, only on passant during the course of today's discussions, and I would like them to perhaps unpick the significance of these 10 very dedicated and loyal men and women who are basically in a very influential position about dealing with Brexit.
Leader of the parliamentary DUP spoke here, so he all had an opportunity to question Nigel, hear what he had to say, and we found there was a lot of common ground, a remarkable common ground. And at the time of the general election, we had a British group meeting which was addressed by Eileen Foster. So we're working very closely with members of the DUP, and they do have a considerable contribution to make.
Yes, I mean, on the DUP, I mean, I have a lot of respect for them. I mean, in the end, with the peace process, it was Ian Paisley who went through with it, and, you know, the Chuckle brothers, the most amazing thing with Martin McGuinness, with, you know, obviously a past I don't support whatsoever, but the point is, if you can work together to save 300 to 350 lives a year, that's worth having. And you have to remember, Eileen Foster, the current leader, you know, she's been involved in bombings where, you know, she's been a victim of bombings. She lost a friend on a school bus was blown up. She's had family killed, her father was killed. You know, yet she is committed to the peace process. These people also have principle. They understand constitution, like a professor does, you know, from Trinity. They understand about liberty and democracy and the importance of constitutional affairs. And thank God they've actually shown a lot of backbone, and I commend them for doing so, because they're doing the right thing and actually providing leadership, which I support. You know, they are doing the right thing. As for tourism, it's funny enough, the last time I was in this room was the vote on the referendum bill, if you remember, where there was a substantial Tory rebellion that actually led to the referendum. So, I mean, you know, look at J.K. Rees-Mogg, the ERG, you know, they're very much they're very good Brexiteers, very principled, and they're doing their best in difficult circumstances. But I think we can win. You know, you're in a tight battle. I mean, if the government had a majority of 100, we'd actually have a real problem, I think. You know, DUP of 10 wouldn't feature much. So I think, you know, maybe it's fate that we are in a position where small numbers matter. Joe Johnson going matters, which is one extra minister voting against the deal. So, you know, I remain optimistic, but we've got to keep the pressure up and say this isn't good enough. You know, this deal will fail in Westminster if they try and force it through.
Well, I'm an Irish nationalist and I have the highest respect for the DUP's position on this matter. You have some interaction with some of them.
So it's a position of integrity and honour. I just think that I'm curious. I was just trying to work out, scribbling on a black envelope here, the likely parliamentary votes and all this. And I thought, SNP. 45 votes or whatever, something like that. And I'm not sure, I assume that I actually thought that the Labour presumed there were votes against the government. And the SNP, I'm not sure. But then you think about what the very odd situation the SNP is in, because they're also split. And I think actually you've got some Eurosceptic SNP MPs and some who actually are federalists. It's a strange world. Indeed, it is.
This is a general Brexit or Irexit question. Anyone who wishes to answer it. In my age group, I am surrounded by Remainers. I like talking to them. Interesting. But what I've really noticed, the big difference between Remainers and Brexiteers, especially in young age groups, is that while we believe that there's going to be a super state, the Remainers believe that this is just us being scaremongering. And what my question is, why are we not talking more about the future of Europe papers that came out last year? They state the plan so clearly with the wonderful EU language, such as this paper is to discuss and agree, obviously not disagree, that's not a possible answer. And we don't talk about it, and my apparently very intelligent and more intelligent than I am as a Brexiteer voters, don't know anything about these papers, and we're not talking about that. Why is that?
Yeah, well, just thank you. I mean, during the Brexit referendum, I was told I was a liar about the EU army. And now we have Macron talking about an EU army that's going to take on America. I don't congratulate the point is about the superstate, and Monet said it, and I know it's been maybe misquoted, but basically, in order to get this through, they had a problem, by the way, in the 50s about an army. The first thing they tried was an army, and the French Parliament voted it down in a lot of anger. So they left it till the end now. But, the reality of this is that if you look at the UN criteria for nation states, the EU now, I think it actually meets all of those criteria. It could apply tomorrow to be a nation state, including obviously an EU army. It now has PESCO, which is a permanent structured headquarters of the EU army. And I'm on Security and Defence Committee. I've had MEPs say, why haven't we shed European blood? And it scares me. If the Crimean situation had arisen and they had an EU army, British troops would be in that army, dying, fighting Russia over Crimea. I'm almost certain. The EU is a new empire, and that's, Barroso called it an empire, a form of empire. Look up the quote. And I'm afraid if you create an empire, it will brush up against other empires. And tomorrow we'll be commemorating millions of people who died because of that happening in the past. And let's not let it happen again.
It was debate on a referendum. We matched our arguments easily. Easily, really. Quality of arguments you presented, not because of the British group and other think tanks and so on over the years, some presented because of newspapers, but we matched our even easily. But what the British Parliament worked out was that we believed what we said and the other side didn't. And that, I think, was crucial. Because you see, what they did was Project Fear. They didn't say, we believe passionately in the European Union because there's going to be European armed state, European superstate, who want to belong to these things because they knew they'd get nowhere with the British public. They therefore, what their case was about this scaremongering about the economics. And that tells you everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlemen, landscape, so what do we actually do about things rather than talk about it? I wonder whether you would agree that we commission leaflets to explain the single market and phrases like full regulatory alignment, meaning that we have to abide by all 22,000 EU laws, regardless of the fact that 2/3 of them are nothing to do with cross-border trade. These EU laws that affect local councils, your local shop and the householder. What do we do to get that message across that the single market is not just about those 6,000 cross-border trade laws, but it's the 22,000 that we don't want and should get rid of?
What can you do except, as I say, those and being active in politics, party politics, and influencing the democratic process? Obviously, there's various ways of doing that. There's writing newspapers, writing letters to newspapers. There's all sorts of things to do. Can I just say on this point, I talk about UK, in my own constituency, it was incredible what happened in 3 years between 2010 and 2013. We had an incredibly active UKIP branch, not as good now as it was then, it was an incredible branch. We put lots of leaflets through letter boxes and so on, and we increased our share of the vote from 5% in the 2010 general election. County Council in 2013 to 29%, we came first and my word was then a shock for the Tories, and what did David Cameron do? We must have a referendum.
Thank you. I think the statistics are very stunning. That the one that hits me is 9/10 of the growth in the world in the next 10 or 15 years. 9/10 are going to come from outside of Europe. I was at the port of Rotterdam, the biggest port in Europe, and it's the 8th in the world at the moment. It won't even feature in the next 10 years. There will be no European port in the top 15 in the world. That's where the world is going. Isn't it sensible to do our own free trade agreements with these countries with that statistic? And the other thing, by the way, just bear in mind, we talk about half of our exports, which isn't actually half, it's 44%, 43% now. Only 12% of our economy is trade with the EU. And Tim will know this better than I. And 6% of businesses trade with the EU. Certain businesses are big, Nissan or whatever, and they get hit hard. That's true, and farmers. But we can, if you're getting no deal, we have 13 billion paid to us in tariffs. Our consumer pays it, unfortunately, but it comes to the British government. And we can pay out 5 billion in compensation to farmers, to industry, whatever, legally under WTO rules in certain ways. So, even in that case, we're better off. Even if you have no deal, we're better off. But these economic figures, I think the Brugge got some really quality research and briefings, which are very, very important to winning the debate. But if you can get that across those actual figures, how important or not unimportant the EU is relatively, that helps.
Thank you. Only for government.
As somebody said earlier this morning, that it was a great pity that voter leave dissolved itself after the referendum. That's true. But it seems to me that there's still a need for various Eurocritical groups to interact with one another, to develop new links perhaps in this current situation, to try and make sure that Brexit is really delivered. And that's a challenge for various organisations. I'm just saying that as an outside observer.
Question from the lady.
I understand that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the EU produced a paper on a technical solution for the Irish border, although perhaps they meant the Irish sea border for everybody else to know. But a great solution would be Irish exit. So I'd like to ask Professor Coughlin, how likely do you think it would be for Irish people to vote for an Irish exit? I understand Irish people are some of the most pro-EU in Europe, and I wondered, why is that? Because it seems that Irish people have swapped one political union or colony for another.
But that was because of the way in which the whole Brexit process has been represented in the last 2 years. But as I said earlier, on 2 referendums, one in 2001 and one in 2008, even though virtually all the political parties and the media were in favour of those treaties, Lisbon and Nice, the voters, by majority voted no. So that, that was a referendum, of course, and referendum campaigns. The current position is that Brexit is regarded as a disaster in Ireland, a disaster for Britain and so on. But if Brexit comes off, if the United Kingdom does leave the European Union and leave the single market and customs union, there will have to be controls of various kinds, north-south. There will have to be, we still want to export our export beef to Britain and so on. It's in that context that I'm not the least doubt that there will be a substantial shift of opinion in the Republic of Ireland in the direction of doing the same thing. It will take some time. It's premised on a real Brexit occurring. And that's still a big question mark over. But if that occurs, you can be sure that, you see, nobody wants North, South, and all political parties in Ireland, in the south of Ireland, and in theory and principle, would like to see United Ireland. They certainly don't want new additions to the North-South border due to Brussels requirements. But if Kingdom leave the EU, and the Republic of Ireland attempts to stay in it, Brussels will require various, different laws in the south, from laws in the north, or laws in Britain. Of course, already you have a different currency. I mean, there is a border there. It's not visible, there's no customs control, but there have to be some controls of some kind. But if the South of Ireland stays in the EU and Kingdom leaves it, anyone from the EU will be able to go get into the Kingdom at the back door by landing in Dublin or Cork and going across the border into Britain. So there have to be controls of some kind to prevent that. Or if the sensible thing if Britain leaves the EU is, of course, to import cheap food and good food from wherever we can get it around the world. And if cheap Fijian sugar or cheap Pakistani mangoes or whatever coconuts from Nigeria are brought into Britain, well, and then how to prevent them going into the EU? You have to have some control to prevent that. So, if our government is so foolish as to attempt to really stay in the EU, if the British really leave, that's going to cause huge problems for us. And from that context, that we expect a significant shift of public opinion in the Republic of Ireland. And the sense of the Irish government should have been to align itself with the British government from the start of this whole business. That's what the interest of the implying that, but instead Veronica and company allowed the TEU, they're ultra-fanatics. They're trying to implement Sunderland's point that this referendum must at all costs overthrow. That's the position of Mr. Veronica and his colleagues in the Irish Parliament.
During the referendum campaign, I joined together with other people who were opposed to ownership of the EU from a Labour League perspective. And so I'd like to tell you that there are many people in the Labour Party who oppose the EU and have done that for years. I was one of those who, in 1975, voted to remain in the EEC, or common market, as we were told. Peter Shaw, Tony Blair against that, and they were right. They were right, because what actually happened, it grew into a superstate, and it is now, I say to people regularly in Guardian, online, where is this, where are we heading with the EU? We're going towards the United States of Europe and the Western Blocks. The question I want to ask, primarily economical, the fraudulent argument that is put forward by the proponents of the EU is that because of supply chains and so forth, it is impossible for us to leave the EU because all the large companies and the large entities will always wish that they will remain within the EU. So can I have assurance from a distinguished economist that this is in fact a complete red herring?
Supply chains in Asia between totally independent nations. So the notion that you have to give up your national independence in order that you can have very easy, rapid supply chains with inputs, elements and so on, materials from neighbouring or nearby country is nonsense. Can I just say in this context that Hong Kong is quite interesting in this, I think most people remember the days when so many toys were made in Hong Kong, all right? So many things were made in Hong Kong. They have, of course, complete free trade. That all sorts of things, supply chains came over from communist China.
Can you imagine a bigger contrast in their political systems between British colony rule for all the rest of it and communist China? They certainly weren't part of a political union and say, no, you don't have to develop your national independence in order to have coordinated supply chains with neighbouring countries. No way.
I'm going to take 2 more questions. We've been going for nearly 7 hours.
Hello, Piers Carter. I'm from Gravesend, which voted 67%. Brexit. Including pretty well 100% of the Sikh population. One thing that we found was very, very powerful on the doorstep was telling people how corrupt the EU is. EU, the letters are craftily concealed within the word fraudulent, you'll notice. And when we said that there are 10,000 people being paid more than our Prime Minister and not paying tax, and that MEPs can claim £4,000 a month without supplying receipts and don't have to pay tax, and the EU has never once been signed off by the auditors. These 3 facts really cause outrage amongst the ordinary people of Gravesend, who are an honest, hard-working lot. Don't you think that these arguments about fraud, dishonesty and corruption in an unelected body would be very powerful even now?
I try and expose it as much as possible. I mean, like the Secretary General, Selmayr, was appointed without any proper interview process. That was a recent thing. And even MEPs were very angry at that from all sorts of parties. But just to say, as an MEP, we actually get our figures audited and we put up every 6 months, right-to-know forms, of course. So you can see, all the expenses that we get involved in. But a lot of MEPs from other countries don't do that. It's very questionable, a lot of this, and I've done my best to expose it. But the best thing is to leave it, isn't it? So there's just no way, you're not paying in our 12 billion net a year towards this.
I just think that even among the younger population, if they knew how corrupt the EU was, they would change their mind. I might not really sympathise with this.
What can we do? May I suggest that somebody writes a British pamphlet about fraud and corruption in the EU. I mean, there's no doubt, by the way, that the whole government structure is used principally by German industry, probably some extent maybe a little bit British industry, but French German industry in particular, for lobbying to get through regulations and directives that favour them. And that was the origin of Dieselgate. This whole business of over the last 10, 15 years of, we're going to buy diesel cars would be very good because it's good for the environment. Then we find out all complete rubbish. And actually our own chief scientific officer was completely useless and was conned by the EU, and it all went through and basically was lobbied by German car companies.
John Thompson, head of Humanities, Revenue and Customs, told the House of Commons, "We do not believe, and this has been our consistent advice to members, we do not believe we require any infrastructure at the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland under any circumstances." What part of that does Mrs May not understand?
Varoufakis said immediately after Chequers, he started saying what he didn't dare say before. He'd been told by Juncker, the EU, that there's no need for a hard border. We didn't hear that before Chequers. I mean, one advantage of Chequers is it scared them, and they actually prefer a free trade agreement to Chequers. So suddenly this has all come out. And also, when I came up originally with these Northern Ireland papers talking about checks away from the border, electronic, etc., the EU said, no, it's not possible. Now you have Barnier talking about market checks in factories and on ships and things. So I think we're winning the battle on that. But, Caroline, you're absolutely right to point that out.
But I think hopefully we've touched on today, where I think all of us probably agree that this has all been a complete nonsense over Northern Ireland. But if we get a free trade agreement, I think that's the best way. That's what other countries do. I'm working on New Zealand at the moment. 80% of the New Zealand deal is based on Canada. So is Australia based on it. Japan is also, these are independent sovereign nations doing massive deals with the EU. We will be their largest single customer when we leave, and we're equivalent to 19 EU countries put together, don't forget that. So we can do a fantastic deal and be free and be sovereign and get out. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your contribution today, and thank you to our panelists for the tremendous expertise that they have put at our disposal.